All right, here we go. We're going to get right into it. Today we're going to be talking about bees, some of the lies that you're being told about pollen and building up natural immunities against allergies. Okay, and this is Dr. Leo. You may have seen some of our videos with him. He's a natural beekeeper. I'll let him introduce himself.
Yes, hi, I'm Dr. Leo with horizontalhive.com. I'm a natural beekeeper supporting my family through natural beekeeping. On horizontalhive.com there is a lot of free information how you can get your own bees and how you can be successful without treating them with chemicals, without feeding them sugar water, and just allowing them to be bees and opening the hive once a year to get some of the bounty that they share with us.
Excellent.
Today we are talking about bees and beekeeping. You may have seen my other videos with Doug talking about all aspects of natural beekeeping, and I'm a full-time natural beekeeper doing it for a living, supporting a family with 5 children, and my website is horizontalhive.com. If you are new to the idea of natural beekeeping, basically we are talking about creating the lifestyle for the bees that allows them to live the same kind of life they would live in a bee tree in the woods, but obviously we put them in a hive of their own that would be more convenient for us to manage. Otherwise, we provide them with the kind of experience they would have in the wild. And if we are successful in following their natural blueprint, then once a year we open the hive and get honey and other products. And bees have no reason to collapse and die, because if they're not doing that in the wild, if they're able to survive there without any sugar feeding, without any medicines from us, without vaccinations of the honeybees, then surely if they come as a swarm and live in your hive, they should be as successful as the bees are in the wild. So what I'd like to talk with you today is not bees themselves. And you would think, okay, we're not talking about honeybees today, then probably we'll talk about honey. Remember, Winnie the Pooh was saying it in whisper, honey. But no, today we're not talking about honeybees, and we're not talking about honey. We're talking about something different but closely related. And here it is. We are fascinated with this sweetness that comes from the beehive. We even call this kind of bee honeybee. But is this the only thing that they bring from the field or from the forest? Of course not. A bee cannot live on honey alone. It would starve to death if it was not bringing in large supplies of pollen into the hive. But for whatever reason, pollen, which is nutritionally the most valuable part of the honey harvest, or anything you can get from the beehive, is very easily overlooked. And there are very good reasons for that. So let's fill in the cracks so that you understand the big picture of what bees need for their own well-being and what they can share with us natural beekeepers. One thing you will notice, if you ever have predators or mice, etc., getting into your beehive or into your stored frames, they're not really honey eaters. We have the image of bears, for example, going after honey, but this was not something I see. I had a few hives that were taken out by bears before I figured out a way of solidifying the hive so it cannot be tipped over or opened and making it bear-proof. But when there were a few instances the bears got into the hive, they were not eating honey first. First, they were going after the pollen, because it is an extremely valuable and nutritious source of protein, and not just protein. I'll tell you in a minute how it is also a natural probiotic prepared by the bees to feed their young, but it will have the same valuable probiotic qualities if you use it as part of your nutrition. My whole cycle of beekeeping starts with a small beehive like that called a swarm trap. It's June, and this time of the year, or a little bit earlier, I hang these in the trees, and just as birds move into birdhouses, the bees move into boxes like that. They're called bait hive or swarm trap. Once they're here, congratulations, you caught a local swarm adapted to your local conditions, and bees also come for free. And again, this is the very good quality of bees, because if they're able to survive without any help from humans on their own in the wild, they will be very tough. They're called survivor stock bees in your beehives. Before they run out of room in a small beehive like that, I take all of the frames from this box and I put them into the bigger box like this here. It's called the horizontal hive. In the system I'm using, there are no additional boxes to put on top. They're very heavy, they're very hard on your back, and they can be very hard on the bees as you have to shuffle boxes around. So instead, I transfer these frames into a horizontal hive like that, and you'll just keep adding frames until these boxes are full. Now, the bees will take what's called foundation, the wax sheets that you provide and that you put there in the frames for them to get started building honeycomb. They will transform it into the honeycomb itself, transforming this hex spartan into the fully drawn comb. And then they will start putting primarily three things into the cells. The queen will be laying eggs, and the queen is the female bee that lays eggs. All the other bees in the colony are her progeny, daughters and sons, sons called drones and daughters called worker bees. And in addition to the eggs and then larvae being raised in these cells, the same cells will be used for storing pollen and honey. Of course, we are more familiar with honey, but today we're talking about pollen. So with each generation of bee larvae raised in these cells, the comb gets darker and darker and darker. And not just that, all of that honeycomb that's getting darker because there are generations of bees being raised in these cells, this is where bees will store pollen. I mentioned how predators or other creatures that are after the honeybee bounty mostly care about pollen rather than honey itself. So here's an example of the frame that had pollen in it that I had in storage. And see how it's all shaved off? Something came in and didn't destroy any of these cells, but all of the pollen was leaked up dry, and this is a mouse. So when you see a mouse getting the stored honey or pollen, they will not be eating through honey, they will be chewing through bee bread because it is, again, nutritional, it's so valuable. So let me show you what bee bread is. And this was one of the reasons I got into natural beekeeping after moving from Russia to America. I was raised in a family with the beekeeper, and this is the kind of honeycomb we were eating as children in our household. My uncle had been keeping bees since before I was born, since 1972. So as a child, my mother would give me small amounts of bee bread every day as a natural probiotic. So let me show you the close-up and explain what this stuff in this very dark comb is. You would all be able to recognize honey. It would be just cells like that filled with the liquid and covered with a capping of wax. But see all of this brown or yellowish paste at the bottom of these cells? We'll break some open to show you the cross-section of it. So look at that. This is pollen, but not just pollen. When bees bring this from flowers, they put it in these cells, but then they will mix this pollen, which would be very dry. They will actually mix it with nectar to raise the moisture content, and then it will start fermenting. Interestingly, it uses the same lactobacteria that we use for making sauerkraut or yogurt. It would be lactobacteria plus bees add their own enzymes. And this is this form of pollen that's called bee bread, pollen that's been fermented by the bees inside the beehive, that they feed to their young, and that is a natural probiotic, and it is sought after by the bears, mice, or any other creatures who want to get the most nutritious part of the beehive products. When we first came to America, I was the graduate student at Indiana University, Bloomington, working on my master's in natural resources management. We would go to the local farmers market and ask local beekeepers, can you sell us some of the bee bread? Because I was missing this kind of fermented pollen from my uncle's beehives from back home. And now that we had children, I wanted them to be able to enjoy this not just very nutritious but very yummy product. It has the taste of dried apricots. When mixed with honey, it is just exquisite. But I was surprised to find out that many American beekeepers never heard about bee bread. When they see pollen deposited into the cells of the honeycomb, they would thought it was a nuisance. They would take a garden hose, and after the honey harvest is done, they would clean out the frames with the garden hose to make them clean and wash all this pollen out so that the frames can be reused just for honey harvest. And I thought, I need to start keeping bees of our own so that we can produce this product for ourselves and for our children to eat. Much later, I realized that there was a good reason why American beekeepers were not harvesting any of this bee bread. The bees deposit this pollen into the portion of the beehive where they raise their young. It's called the brood chamber. But this is also the part of the beehive that most American beekeepers repeatedly treat with chemicals to kill all of the bad guys, the varromites and other parasites. Guess what? All of these chemicals are easily absorbed into wax, into honey, into pollen too. So after a number of treatments with chemicals of the brood chamber, whatever good things you have in there are no longer suitable for human consumption. They would have very high concentrations of chemicals, and not just from bees flying into the field. You cannot control that. If the field has been sprayed, they may pick up some of that poison and bring it back to the beehive. It's unfortunate. You will have some of that even if you do not put any chemicals into a beehive yourself. But I think it's appalling that the highest concentrations of chemicals in America found inside beekeepers' beehives is not what the bees brought through from the field, something you have not much control of, but something that beekeepers themselves put into the beehive to fight infection, to find parasites and whatnot. If you search online for pesticide contamination of honey, you'll find university papers well researched with hundreds of samples of wax, pollen, honey taken all over the United States. And you will read in some of these papers that on average there may be a cocktail of 12 different chemicals in bee bread, this pollen inside the cells. And of course, if this is the case, if the beekeeper is administering all of the stuff that gets into this bee bread, they cannot use this very dark calm because it would be potentially toxic even to humans. So how do you get this pollen that's not contaminated and that's a good product to consume? And then even let's talk about whether it is a good product to consume in the first place. Back 30 or 40 years ago, there was actually a government-sponsored program when they wanted to look at the alternative medicinal remedies, including pollen, and to see whether it's true that consuming pollen can help you with seasonal allergies and other things that many people experience improvement with. And most of these experiments returned the verdict that no, researchers are not finding any positive influence of pollen consumption on seasonal allergies and other autoimmune conditions. So how can it be that thousands of people buy local honey because they feel it helps them with seasonal allergies and stuff? And when researchers look at that, they're not finding anything. Well, let's ask ourselves the question, are they looking at exactly the same product or not? Because pollen can be pollen, and not all pollens are created equal. If you read books devoted to bees, this is not even about the products of the beehive, this is about how to provide good nutrition for the honeybees so that you can multiply your beehives on your own without buying any bees. It's called Raising Honeybee Queens. I translated this from French for you. This is the best book on being self-sufficient in getting your first swarms in the wild, but then being able to turn this one colony into as many colonies as you want exponentially. So the author here talks about providing bees with optimal nutrition during this very active phase of bees expanding and making more babies and eventually being ready to turn one beehive into many through natural means called swarming, when they split and half of the bees fly off, or through you during artificial swarming for them, taking a few frames, putting them in a separate box, and they raise a separate new queen, and then one colony becomes 2 or 3. We have additional videos on that you can look up. So the author talks about the importance of high quality nutrition for the bees, and he talks about collecting pollen from the bees to be able to feed them back to the bees during their growth phase. And he talks here about the proper way of storing this pollen so it retains all the beneficial properties that drive the development of the honeybee colony, and that would serve as very important part of human nutrition too. And the key to it is to preserve pollen fresh. When we get it at the entrance of the hive, we'll get there in a minute. In addition to harvesting honey as part of this dark comb and squeezing it or harvesting right there, you can capture a lot of pollen at the entrance of the hive before it came and got deposited by the bees into the honeycomb. It's not as nutritionally valuable because it has not been fermented, it's not bee bread, but this is the bee pollen that they sell in health food stores that comes in jars like that, and you see these granules of pellets. And this is what's called bee pollen, sold in stores. But wait a minute, pollen brought from the field on the day that it's been harvested by the bees is a product with high moisture content. If you were to put fresh pollen, and again, the books on beekeeping even tell you, if you want to preserve the qualities of the pollen, vitamin, enzymes, or if you talk about bee bread, probiotics, you cannot be drying pollen, but this is exactly what they do. For the ease of storage and retail distribution, they wouldn't be able to seal this hermetically in a jar and sell it to you, because then it would go moldy and spoil inside the jar. But freezing pollen, the best way of preserving it live and fresh, is something that would require them freezing it and then handling it with the chain of frozen installation. It's just not convenient. So unfortunately, the bee pollen sold in the most common form through health food stores has all been dried, and beekeepers even do not hold it as a secret. It's being dried as part of the process of putting it in the jar, but everybody admits that this degrades the nutritional quality of this very product. And then why do it at all if right there, before it gets to you from the health food store, many of the beneficial properties of it have been removed by subjecting pollen to very high temperatures during the dry process. So what I suspect happened with all of these university studies from decades back, when they asked themselves the question, okay, does consumption of pollen help people with allergies statistically? And they were not finding any correlation. I think that probably what was happening, first, they were not using fresh pollen. They were just getting the pollen that's been dried. And you can look in these papers and see what kind of preparation was involved. So they were not really talking about fresh pollen. And they were talking about the powder that's been dehydrated. Another thing, if pollen really can help you with allergies to local pollen, the hay fever and other ailments people have when things are in bloom and all of these particles float in the air. What exactly is an allergy? Well, it's when a protein gets into your body, for example, a pollen that you inhale, something is in bloom, and it gets into your system, and your immune system doesn't recognize this protein and thinks that this is something alien that needs to be fought. This is why people may have rash, or they may have breathing problems, just because there is swelling through the inflammation. The body is trying to fight off the protein, some specks of pollen that it does not recognize. So if potentially pollen were to have this beneficial impact of training your immune system to recognize local proteins that are not bad, then you would want it to be coming from local plants, because each plant produces its own kind of pollen. It would be different proteins, and trying to train your immune system for, say, the pollen of clover, something is now in bloom, may not be even necessary if you live in a completely different ecosystem where there is no clover pollen in the air, and vice versa. So it needs to be local. And I think that if all of these experiments were done with these two things taken into account, first, do not use dried pollen that was dried at very high temperature. Use fresh pollen and use it local. then lo and behold, they might be able to start seeing some of these correlations between the consumption of local pollen and people getting freedom from allergies and such. I never make any medicinal claims about my honey. The form of pollen that I mostly sell is just honey that's been taken out of the comb. But see how murky it is? It is fresh honey. I just spun it out of the frames less than a month ago. It is our spring harvest, but it is so murky you cannot see through the jar because I take care to make sure that all of that pollen deposited into the frames is being extracted and squeezed with the rest of the liquid honey to provide you with the highest quality nutrition there. Bee bread is a little bit tricky to produce because in order to harvest it, you need to go into the hive, you need to get these frames, you need to cut out these small chunks of bee bread and then squeeze them and mix them into honey. But if you want to get the largest benefits of consuming pollen as part of your diet, and if you want to produce it in large enough quantity to last you and your family the whole year, frozen fresh in the refrigerator and the freezer, then I absolutely love this tool. It's called Pollen Collector, that allows you to capture pollen at the entrance of the hive. And I will show you how it works and how a simple tool like that, if you add it to your beekeeping, literally pays for itself in just a couple of days. It's sort of 2 or 3 different kinds of pollen you can harvest from the beehive. First, the pollen that is dissolved in honey. So when you get honey extracted from a hive and you take care to take all of these frames with bee bread and squeeze that out using honey press. You can see it in one of the other videos we did. So if you squeeze all of that pollen and you mix everything together, then even your extracted honey will have such a high pollen content that the jars will not even look transparent. They will be murky because of the amount of pollen in there. The other way of capturing pollen would be actually taking very old frames and cutting out strips with bee bread there and harvesting that and squeezing it, putting in small jars. If you have no freezer to preserve it, you would pour some honey on top, the same way as they were doing with berries and all. Put raspberries in your jar, cover it with honey, and it will store in the cellar long term. The same with bee bread. And finally, the third way is to putting a special cage at the entrance of the hive. And when the bees go through that cage, the pollen that they bring from the flowers gets detached from them and falls into a special drawer from which you can collect it. As in many parts of agriculture, there is this trade-off between quantity and quality. And of course, this fermented pollen, the bee bread from inside the cells, is the most valuable kind. However, the quantity is so limited that I can never produce enough. I produce enough for my family and some to sell, but I regularly sell out of the bee bread honey because this is the variety that people are specifically searching for. This, by comparison, you can produce a lot of. Nutritionally, it has not been fermented, but if it is collected and then stored frozen, fresh, instead of being dehydrated and dried, it will still be an extremely valuable product nutritionally. Trade-off quantity, quality. You won't be able to produce the same quality as with bee bread as if it was fermented by the bees, but you can mix it with some of the nectar and ferment this pollen yourself. We'll get to that in a minute. But quantity-wise, you can only harvest a few pounds per hive of bee bread a year, but with this, on a nice sunny day, a very strong colony can bring a full pound of pollen a day. So that's part of also your beekeeping becoming financially self-sustaining. A box like that that's cost $49 will pay for itself in just one day of collecting it, when, just for the sake of comparison and example, I bought some bee pollen at the local health food store. It is $30 for 5 ounces, so $6 an ounce, which is basically $100 a pound. So if you have a contraption like that attached to a beehive that allows you to harvest $100 worth of pollen a day, not only you're providing very high local nutrition to your customers and for your family, but also your whole operation becomes more financially successful, because you do not just put everything into producing honey. You diversify your sources of income, and many people make more money by selling pollen than by selling honey itself.
I'd like to add that when you buy it from the health food store, like you said just a second ago, it's devoid of all the actual beneficial enzymes, right? So you're paying a lot for a little, and then it's not even as effective.
So let me show you how this pollen can be harvested in the entrance of the hive. All right, here we are. This is called a pollen collector. This one is specifically made for horizontal hives, but I will also show you how to adapt it to conventional vertical Langstroth hives that many beekeepers use in this country. But this is made for horizontal hives such as the lay-ends. This is how the whole thing works in principle. Do you see that white screen with openings? When bees return from the field, they carry pollen on their bodies. All of these pellets of pollen that's sold in stores, this is something attached to their legs. And if they have to squeeze to these 3/8 of an inch openings, the pollen from their body gets scraped off, and it falls through a screen into this drawer in which you'll be able to harvest it. Then this drawer still has instructions that come with the trap if you buy it from horizontalhive.com, but I absolutely love this very simple tool. It's very economical, pays for itself in no time, and it is also designed with bees in mind. Let me explain that. Bees can store a lot of honey inside the hive, so if all of a sudden they cannot harvest fresh nectar from the field, they can go for a month because they have honey stores inside that box. But they do not harvest as much pollen from the field to have huge reserves in the hive, because it is usually available even when there is no nectar. We all know that honey flow, availability of nectar in nature, is not always there. If it gets too dry, if you're in the middle of the drought, the plants may not have enough moisture to produce nectar, even though the flowers are in bloom. But with pollen, the whole point of the trees and other plants making flowers is to help them with their propagating their own species. So pollen is there even when it's very dry. So bees are able to harvest pollen during almost any weather except when it rains. They do not store too much inside this hive. It means that if you were to install a special thing that will be capturing pollen at the entrance of the hive before it gets into the hive, you cannot leave this on too long. Otherwise, within a few days, they will run out of olive pollen, which is their source of protein, and then they will start starving because they do not have any way of bringing protein through this screen. For this reason, this one is done with bees in mind, and this white gate that you saw, through which the bees will go and come and go, it actually opens, letting bees through so they can replenish their own reserves inside the hive. So you can mount it, as I will show in a minute, and you can leave this on permanently during the summer months. But every 3 days you're able to close and open it, and this will collect pollen for you. And then for 3 days, without detaching it from the hive, you open it, and the bees are able to bring pollen into the hive and replenish their reserves. And this can be done from late spring until the fall, harvesting a lot of pollen in this drawer. Setting it up on the hive, attaching is very simple, and I like the way it's done on this particular pollen collector from horizontalhive.com. Many of them require you to drill through the roof or something, running screws through the roof to attach it to the hive, but this is done very intelligently like this. First, let's say this is an active entrance. If you don't have the top entrance over which these can be positioned, say you only have a hive that has the bottom entrance. Not a problem at all. You just open the bottom entrance, make sure it's on some kind of a stand so that the pollen collector can be hanging down from that entrance. But you can install it over any entrance in any shape. If your entrance is circular, like on the hive that we will see later in the day, Then you just put it over the circular entrance so that the bees come and go through this chamber. For the sake of this instruction, let's show you how to install it here. So you position it over the entrance so that when you look inside, you see that this is how the bees will be coming and going. There is the entrance of the hive, and they will be passing through this hallway, through this chamber on their in and out of this pollen collector. So as you press it against the front wall, you mark it with your pencil here in the corner, just where the two corners of the roof of this pollen collector are. You take it off, so here are my pencil markings, here and here, and you drive two little screws in here, 2.5 inches in and 1.25 inch down from your corner markings. Because what happens here, on the underside of the lid, there is this groove, and when you put screws into the wall, letting them stick out by 3/8 of an inch, they will go in like that, and then you can hang this pollen collector on the front of your hive like a painting. So you mark this position 2.5 inches in and 1.25 inch down from the corner of the roof. This will be the same measurement no matter what hive you are using. And then you drive screws with a flat head.
Would you screw this right onto a live hive?
Yes, you can. And we'll install one over a live hive right today. Okay, so press it against the wall, and then it goes down, and it catches on the head of these screws and stays put. Very sturdy, no other attachment necessary. So when you first install this pollen collector, there are a few things you need to do to prepare it. This particular one, painting is optional, but I recommend it. The cover is made out of laminated plywood, but if you were to leave it like that, it got degraded by the elements much quicker than if you paint it. So you can use polyurethane. This one was one coat of polyurethane. That's all you need for it to last many, many years. Again, if you want to stay away from any paint, you can use it as is. Just be prepared that maybe 5 or 7 years down the road, you'll need to replace this piece of plywood. And the box will eventually go grayish through sun exposure, but you can use it as is. Again, my recommendation is to give it a coat of paint. Another thing you need to do, think about it. So this screen has openings that are big enough for the honeybee, the worker honeybee, to pass through, but it's not big enough for their brothers, the drones, to pass through. For this reason, this box comes with the thing that's called the drone release valve. So before installing it, there are the openings inside this chamber through which bees will be coming and going, and there are special tubes that are cones tapered like that. You insert them there and you press it in, tap it with a hammer if you cannot push it all the way through. So it goes like that, and there is another one on the other end of the chamber. So you just put it in, and then you press it or tap it with a hammer or with a boot block until it's flush with the wall. So now what happens, if there are drones coming from the inside of the beehive, they cannot escape by going through these openings. They will start searching for an opening to go out, and they will find this particular one and fly out. Now, it also means that when these drones return, they will be coming and trying to get in through this screen, and they won't be able to get through. So if you want to be gentle on the drones, you can time the installation of this pollen collector to the time of the year when bees themselves evict the drones. Later in the fall, the time when the drones have already fertilized the queens that are there flying on mating flights, and when the bees themselves get rid of the hive of the drones. If you do it during the other part of the year, then unfortunately drones will not be able to get back into the hive, and that's part of collecting pollen. then just make sure during the first few days of the screen being down, you come there, and if it starts being clogged up by the drones, there may be a lot of them that they will be in the way of foraging bees returning to the hive. You'll need just to take them off this screen. They have no stinger, so the drones will not sting you, and unfortunately they cannot get back to the hive and get nourished, so you can throw them into a bucket of water and dispose of them. Again, it's not something I normally recommend doing, but this is part of pollen collecting. You can not have the opening small enough for the bees to squeeze through and lose their pollen, and at the same time allowing the drones to get back.
So explain to them about drones, how they're just there just to do that job, and they're going to die anyways and be evicted from the...
Yeah. Okay. There are two kinds of bees other than the queen inside the hive. The female bees is what we call the worker bees, the ones that do the work inside the hive. They build honeycomb, they nourish the young larvae, they fly out and collect nectar and pollen in the field. So these are the female worker bees. And the drones, which are much larger, are the male bees, and their only task inside the hive is to fly out and fertilize queens from other hives that are flying out there and need fertilization to be able to start laying eggs. So these drones, because they serve only one function, are evicted from the beehive by their sisters when their services are no longer necessary. So at the end of the year, of this active bee year, they would be thrown out of the hive or stung to death anyway, and the hive doesn't need them at this point. If you wanted to preserve the drones, one other option you have is, once this is already installed and the pollen is coming through here, you can open another entrance of the beehive. For example, this one has the entrance underneath. You can have two entrances open. So the pollen will be captured at this entrance, and the drones would be able to return to the hive through the other entrance, whether it's positioned laterally or under the primary entrance here. However, normally, as part of the pollen collection, drones are gone before their natural time of being evicted from the hive. Again, if they're starting to clog up this screen, just grab them and throw them into a bucket of water. I'm sorry, I know it sounds cruel, but nature is going to kill them anyway. And also, when looking at things like that look cruel to us, I'm thinking about it in these terms. Is what I am doing going to harm the colony as a whole? And the answer is no. There are so many other beehives that I do not collect pollen from, and drones from these other colonies will be able to fly and accomplish their duty. So it's just always a trade-off. Yes, it would be best to let all of the drones back so they can get recharged on honey and go and mate with the queens, but sometimes you have to sacrifice them in order to be able to produce another product from a beehive.
And you're only doing 3 days on and then opening it up anyways.
Correct, you do. Also, when you first install it, bees will need to get accustomed to this being a new porch that somebody built attached to their beehive. So when you first install it, leave this gate open for the first few days, like 3 days. This will let the bees reorient. They will start using this opening, and then once you pull down and push down this screen and they start going through the screen, they will already not be confused because they will get accustomed to using this particular entrance to the beehive. And this is pretty much the whole setup for that, because it's protected from the rain by this roof. Even if it rains, the pollen inside the drawer will not be spoiled. But occasionally, like every 3 days, when you come to open and close this gate, this is your time to bring a container with you, like a small bucket or even a bag, and you open this and you will be pouring pollen from it into your container and putting it back. And because you have to visit it every 3 days anyway to open and close it, you can be collecting pollen continuously during that time. Our website, horizontalhive.com, and this is the style of the beehive that I use myself, and we made many videos explaining the advantages of providing bees with a home that's not composed of many boxes one on top of the other, where the integrity of their nest is often destroyed by boxes being shuffled around. Instead, in this one long box, all of the frames stay together. You can add some frames on the side, you can subtract frames when you harvest honey without touching the integrity of the brood chamber. So this is called Layens horizontal hive, after the inventor of them, George de Layens, author of the book Keeping Bees in Horizontal Hive.
This also helps if you're handicapped. We have many people get a hold of us that are in wheelchairs and they are loving beekeeping with the horizontal hive. They could never do it with the stack hives.
Yes, thank you, Doug. And also it's awesome for doing beekeeping with your children, because if I were using the conventional vertical model with boxes that may be 50 pounds, then children are not really helpful in handling commercial beehives. But with these, my daughters were able to start helping me in the bee yard when they were very little. By the time Zariana was 12, she already had a dozen of beehives of her own. So if a 12-year-old child can do it, so can you. But some people prefer different styles of beekeeping, and I'm not saying this is the best one. This is something that gives me a lot of pleasure. Another book I translated for you on the basics of natural beekeeping is called Keeping Bees with a Smile. And to me, the smile is as important as the honey, pollen, or any other things that come out of the beehive. So if you enjoy working with the conventional vertical beehives, let me show you how the same pollen collector can be attached to the vertical American hives that you may already have. And so this hive is called Langstroth hive, and this is the typical American beehive that consists of multiple boxes. Here, for simplicity, I only have one box, but it's expanded vertically by adding more and more boxes as the bee colony grows. The same principle, you just attach it to the front wall so it covers the entrance. And because the entrance to Langstroth hives is typically at the very bottom, just make sure that on some kind of support, it can be pallet, it can be a couple of cinder blocks, but it needs to have a drop in front of the entrance so that the lower portion of the trap can be hanging down. The same principle as we discussed with horizontal hives. You position your pollen collector or pollen trap on the front wall. You look inside to see that the entrance is fully contained inside this chamber, because this is how the bees will be coming and going. So it's here. Then you mark the top of the roof here on the hive. Then you measure 2.5 inches in from the edge of the roof and 1.25 inches down, and this is where you drive these two little screws in. These are 1 inch, they're called metal screws, they're for sheet metal, 1-inch screws, and they have a flat head which will be catching on this groove inside the pollen collector, and they're keeping it attached to the beehive. All right, so it sticks out 3/8 of an inch, 1/2 inch. Then you press this against the hive body and you let it hang on this groove. There's a groove under the roof, and it catches on the head of the screw and stays attached like that. And then the same thing, you can open and close this gate as on the horizontal Layens hive. Now, I'd like you to look from this direction. The entrance of many Langstroth hives is very long. It's longer than this box. So to prevent bees from using this as the entrance, you just need to close it. It can even be a piece of duct tape, but duct tape bees will eventually chew through. The easiest way to close this is to take a small amount of metal, like a scrap of aluminum flashing. It can be even a soda can, and you cut a small piece of metal and fold it 90 degrees and insert it here so that there is a piece of metal covering it. So this is called their entrance reducer, specifically for Langstroth hives, And you can install this, but it doesn't have to be anything special. It can be just a piece of metal folded like that will cover this hole. If you are using some special entrance reducer, it goes between the bottom board and the hive body itself like that. See, when it's installed, it covers this gap. So then when you install the pollen collector over it, there is no gap and bees are not able to use this small portion of the entrance that's wider than the pollen collector. So no matter what hive model you are using, horizontal layers hives, there are free plans to build them on horizontalhive.com. You can also buy a horizontal hive ready-made delivered to your door on horizontalhive.com. If you use conventional American beehives, they can all benefit from having this attachment, the pollen collector on the front, so that during the warm season, in addition to honey, you can harvest the very valuable pollen from your bees. There is one more way of attaching the pollen collector to the front of the hive, and this you can use if the front of the hive is so valuable you don't want to drive the screw into that. Doug has one of the hives that has a decorative painting on the front wall. So we'll walk there and we'll show you how to install this pollen collector on an active hive, in that case with the ornamental panel on the front that doesn't require any drilling whatsoever.
And you can get your ornamental panel at horizontalhive.com. And this is the decorative panel that I got from horizontalhive.com. And we had a baby this morning as well. Now back to the bees.
Welcome to the bee yard. This is an insulated horizontal hive. There are free plans to build one like that on horizontalhive.com. You can also purchase one ready-made. You can even get one of these paintings with it too. And it's insulated with natural wool all around to keep bees warm in the winter and cool in the summer. And right now it's packed with frames and with the bees, and you can tell that it's very active at the entrance. So when the hive is that active, it's a good time to install your pollen collector and start capturing some of the pollen at the hive entrance. Now, because this hive has the painting, you may not want to drill into the painting. So another option, a very simple one, is to attach this pollen collector to the position where it needs to be with a simple ratchet strap. The checklist before you put it on for the first time. The gate is fully open, almost like flaps in the airplane before take off, right? Fully open. Make sure nothing is in the drawer. When you first buy it, it may have instructions in there or hardware or these tubes. So these tubes for drone escape are installed. The drawer is closed and it's painted. This one got one coat of polyurethane, or you can paint it with exterior acrylic water-based paint, and now it's ready to go on. It really helps if you have a helper to do it, but if not, to hold your ratchet strap in place while you are positioning it, I like to use my hive tool, the bee brush, or even a stick, sticking it under the hive and providing support for the ratchet strap temporarily while you are wrapping it around the pollen collector. If the bees start being agitated, I have my smoker here just to give a couple of puffs of smoke here, so they know I'm not going to break in and steal their honey. I'm just stealing their pollen. Okay. My hive tool goes on here. Oh, here. Oh, it's so heavy I wouldn't be able to push it in almost. All right.
And a good time to work your bees is in the middle of the afternoon, because everyone's going and coming and there's less bees in there.
Fewer bees because thousands of them are on clover right now. right, just prepare your ratchet strap. All right, make sure it goes over here. Okay, we'll be able to adjust it after. And it just goes under the roof like that. All right, and I ratchet strap into place. All right. I make sure that the entrance is fully contained there, which it is. You'll get a picture of that. Make sure the strap goes all around, and mission accomplished. There's the entrance. You will see that the bees temporarily will be confused for maybe about 1 hour. You also see all of these drones here, the big guys. These are the ones that fortunately they won't be able to make it through the screen once it's installed. And again, I sincerely apologize, but if I have 50 beehives and I only do pollen collection of 2 or 3, my beehives as a sum total of them produce thousands and thousands of drones to do the fertilization of the queens on their mating flights. So give it about 3 days. After 3 days you are ready to come and close the gate and start collecting pollen.
You're getting my beard. And just so you know, no one was stung during the making of this video.
No.
All those bees got crazy, but it's weird because you're programmed into watching people work in full bee suits and face stuff and all that stuff. But every time we've done videos together, we go out there totally just like we are, and 98% of the time we don't really have a problem. You might catch a sting here and there. Just remember, never pinch the stinger and grab it out. You want to scrape it off because there's a pus sac on that stinger. There's a pus sac on that stinger, and that'll push the venom into your bite. So you just scrape it off with your fingernail, credit card, and then pour some apple cider vinegar on it right away, and it'll neutralize the whole sting. If you're allergic to bees, you might want to stay in a bee suit.
Correct. And sometimes you do want to get stung. One of my friends got into beekeeping because he had arthritis in the finger joints.
Right.
And he specifically wanted to get stung because you go to a naturopath and they charge you good money to give you this sting.
Yeah.
When you're a beekeeper, you can get as many as you like at no cost.
Excellent. So if you guys want more information, free plans, his books that he's done, all this stuff is at horizontalhive.com.
Yes, and I have something exciting and worrisome coming up. Exciting and scary, but it's all positive. So it's exciting for you and it's scary for me. July 12th, 2025 is my bee day, and I'm opening up my doors, and if you go to horizontalhive.com, you can come for free and say hello and happy bee day, Dr. Leo. Again, it's July 12th, 2025 in Kabul, Missouri, in my shop. You can stop by, ask your questions, or look at my bees, at my beehives live and full of bees. You can also buy any Horizontal Hive equipment with a good discount and a 10% cash discount on top of that. And it's just a day of fun from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. with live music at 3 p.m. My favorite singer-songwriter is coming to perform for us. So, informal, free of charge, bee day event, July 12th, 2025.
And I'll be there as well, so you can come and see me, talk to Dr. Leo, and have all this information at your fingertips, ask all the questions you want, and pick up some supplies.
Yes, and let's make it big. This is what you will be seeing when you start collecting your own pollen, but remember from the beginning of your video, this will be the real stuff.
So if you leave it closed for the couple of days, then you close it for 3 days, Then you open it for how many days?
3 days.
And then you close it for 3 days.
Yeah.
And how long does that process actually work?
As long as you need pollen.
Okay.
And it can be the entire summer until the first frost. The first frost in the fall will kill the remaining flowers, and after that bees will stop bringing in pollen. But until then, and from early in the spring, you can be doing that. Now, one thing we did not cover. It is good if you make sure that your hive is not on the point of getting ready to swarm, because the pollen collector would interfere with the queen leaving and the maiden queen going on the mating flight. So it's a good idea to do all of the other things like splitting the hive that we covered in other videos ahead of time. Either wait until the swarm departs and a few days for the queen to go on the mating flight, or do the artificial swarming procedures that I described in Keeping Bees in Horizontal Hives, they describe in Keeping Bees with a Smile. And then once you are sure that the hive is not going to swarm and that screen that you have here is not going to interfere with the procreation or with the queen coming and going on the mating flight, this is the right moment for you to install the pollen collector and start getting your pollen. And as we discussed, what you will be collecting is something you won't be able to even buy for any money from anywhere, because it will be local, it will be fresh instead of dehydrated and dry, and it will be coming with the flow of season, capturing all of the diversity of things in bloom in your particular location.
HorizontalHive.com. See you guys July 12th in Kabul, Missouri.